right, thank you all for coming out and hanging with Nate. We're going to maybe tuck into some fun stories. So Nate and I met, I don't know, maybe almost 10 years ago. As was announced, so Nate is the founder and CEO of Pocket, which is now part of Mozilla, for those of you who use Firefox. As was mentioned, I'm a partner at Foundation Capital. Maybe, Nate, if we could just start, tell us a bit about the founding story of Pocket and what that was like and in those early days.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Pocket, I feel like has had 3 chapters. There was the indie developer, it was just me working on it, basically like hack project for a few years. Then there was the venture-backed company that was Pocket, and then now about a year actually at Mozilla post-acquisition. So Pocket got started really, it was just one night I just sat down to tackle a personal need. I was emailing myself links all the time. I was never actually getting back to reading them. And I just made a little Firefox add-on that allowed you to save things for later and then come back to them. And very quickly found that a lot of other people had that problem. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. I eventually kind of made it my full-time gig just on the side. And then you and I got connected back, I think, in 2011. And through a couple of different stories there, ended up raising money and starting to build a company.
And then the third chapter of being a part of Mozilla. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so
almost a year.
So about this time last year, end of February, we were acquired by Mozilla. We've been set up as an independent subsidiary, so we're still operating pretty independently. But it's been a really amazing, awesome place for Pocket. It was kind of everything we were hoping for there. And actually, I mean, I'm really enjoying it. I'm more dialed in than ever before. We're being able to grow. We've grown the team like 50% last year. We've like 10x'd the user base that reaches our like recommendations, and it's been a really awesome experience so far.
Yeah. So one of the things that folks of you who've raised venture capital before have probably heard is you need to have kind of a product. You need to have this proof point. Proof matters, as you just heard from the last speaker, and yet you also need to have a bigger vision, because if it's just a silly 160 lines of code plugin, maybe that's not enough, right? I occasionally talk about this as the skinny beak and the fat body, right? Like you need the skinny beak to kind of get into the market, and then behind it needs to be this big fat body of innovation and vision. And you kind of exemplify that metaphor. I'd love for you to tell a little bit about kind of when you figured out that this 160 lines of code, which solved this very personal problem, began to sort of, like, as you pulled that string, you began to sort of see that there was more to it than that. What happened for that?
Yeah, I think the first piece was just seeing how many people this problem resonated with. I put this add-on up on my site. I'm pretty sure my friends and my mom were like the only users of it. And then a Lifehacker writer stumbled upon it, wrote about it, and it just like blew up from there. I just found that a lot of other people had this need, that they were coming across all this content, they didn't know what to do with it, and they needed a way to be able to capture it and come back to it. That was kind of the first like, oh, okay, there's something more here. And then really like the next big piece of that really defined the rest of our vision over the last 10 years was this notion that like if we have all of these people capturing content across the web, essentially every interesting link that's happening, and we see how people engage with that content, we get this really unique kind of human curated perspective of content. And so the kind of vision that evolved from all of that was this like first step was, okay, let's create really great tools that enable people to capture, save, no matter where. Like, around the time the iPhone came out, it was actually really hard to be able to save from any app or any domain you use. We take like the little share menu that comes up for granted now. We had to get built into Twitter. We have to get built into Flipboard and Firefox. We had to do all those integrations. And then be able to have a great reading experience on every platform. And then from there, being able to actually start building recommendations, actually use all of the data and insights we're getting. And then finally, the big piece after that was, how do we use all of that to power really high quality content discovery at scale? And that was a huge part of the thesis around why we did the acquisition with Mozilla. It was just be able to get to that kind of scale a lot faster than we could do independently.
And when I met Nate, I think you had 3 million or so users around the world. I remember looking through the data, being struck by parts of the world sort of using Pocket because, so in Japan, I think people are using it to basically read on the train rides between home and work. And now you are at, how many million users are using the service?
Well, the 3 million wasn't active at the time.
Yeah, I figured that out later. I'm like, wait a minute, these just signed up. They weren't actually using the service every day.
Yeah, Pocket reaches about 100 million people worldwide now, from our content recommendations all the way down to people saving content for later. Lots of different uses for it now.
So from 160 lines to 100 million users, Mozilla is a big piece of that, and integration into all sorts of different publisher sites. One of the things that I know folks in the room are curious about, because nobody ever talks about this stuff, is how do you manage the process of becoming acquired by a larger company? This was not a quick flip. This was something you've been working on for a long time. You had this very expansionist view of sort of what was possible. And yet at the same time, you also saw this opportunity to be a part of something that had even more distribution than you had. Can you share some of the secrets that nobody ever talks about in terms of how you should get acquired if you're a small company that still has big vision?
I mean, I think the most important thing to understand is like it's terrifying and it's this really like emotional experience as well because it's something you build. It's like this thing you created. It's this team that you've worked with, and getting through that hurdle of deciding to like give up ownership of that is a really hard concept. And for us, I think what really made it work was from the very beginning, when even before we met, we had this litmus test, which was, you know, we cared about this product, we cared about the mission, the thing that we were building, and we wanted to work on it for a really long time. And if we found a partner that let us be able to do that bigger or better or faster than we could do independently, then of course that was really interesting because we cared most about being able to accomplish that goal. And that's like the way we met was because I was talking to Evernote when it was still just me working on this about a acquisition, and we talked with the team there, and it became very clear that we just didn't share the same vision of where we thought this could go. And a good friend and advisor at the time was like, by the way, this is why people raise money. It's like, so you have your own team to go build this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, finally figured out why that happens. And a week later, you and I got connected, and 2 weeks after that, had raised money, which was really changed my perspective of how fundraising goes. Set me up for a little bit of failure there for the next one, but it was kind of how we got going.
Yeah. So I'm a product-first investor, so when I meet someone like Nate, who is a product-first founder and builds something that people love and has, you know, I think a lot of aspirations about where to take it, I tend to get hooked. But you talk to a lot of investors, not in the context of the financing that I led back in the Series A kind of time frame, but in the Series B, you talk to a lot of investors. And one of the things I remember hearing, Nate and I would have these weekly calls and sometimes daily calls to catch up on these investor meetings. And he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to go into this meeting the next day, and this really prominent venture capitalist has, you know, 50,000 saves in Pocket, and they love the product, and they're using it every day, multiple times a day, and yet they don't want to invest. So what did you learn from that? And what might you share with the folks here who hear many no's, and what advice would you have for them?
I'd say the biggest learnings that I took away, and the things I would do differently as a CEO, and certainly around fundraising, to the point you made, I was a product person and engineer first. When we did that fundraise, it was like all of a sudden I had $2.5 million, and I used to be a developer, and now I'm a CEO, and it's like, okay, now I have to figure out what to do with that. And it was always this learning curve. But I never really went out and created those relationships. I looked at fundraising as like, oh, I could just hunker down and I build and I build and I build, and then I come out of the cave, and then it's like I call 20 people up, and you're like, hey, I want a term sheet next week, and they're like, I have no idea who you are or what you do, and never really kind of created those relationships ongoing, never told our story ongoing. And then as a result, it was hard for when we talked to investors who really like understood and used this product, and like it was hard for them to kind of think about oh, but that's not how I use it, or that's not how I see others using it. And if people had that mental model, it was hard to kind of get them off that. And I mean, the speaker just before says, like, you get to pitch once, you know? Pitch was the first time we talked to a lot of people. So that was one of the quickest things we learned as we went through it.
This is an important lesson, and you know, you've all heard the Glengarry Glen Ross sort of always be selling, always be fundraising, like always be thinking about these conversations, even when you just finished your, you know, you're raising capital and you're 2 years away from ever needing to talk to someone like me again. It's worth it to build those relationships. It takes a long time. You know, in the book that I wrote last year, in which I interviewed Nate, he was among the 50 designers and designer founders who I talked with. One of the patterns and one of the things in the book that I was trying to sort of break was this notion of design as this sort of detail-oriented, purely stylistic exercise. Back when I was at IDEO, people would think about designers as, you know, the people you brought in to make what the engineers made look pretty. And you embody these designer founders who I think are the future of the definition of design, which is much more this concept of design as the what, like what problem am I solving? Can you talk a bit about, you know, how you balanced the sort of the beautiful details of Pocket and the experience that you really preserved and continued to build out with also this larger vision and how you think about walking that balance between thinking big and executing details?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that's one of the things that kills me when I talk to other CEOs or other companies. I mean, we just hired a new head of design at Pocket just in the last month, and as we were going through that interview process and talking to other designers, the number of heads of designs that I had talked to that reported either into, you know, some product group or to the marketing team instead of the CEO, like we do at Pocket, it killed me, because design is not what it necessarily looks like. Design is how it's identifying the problems and figuring out the right solution. And it's ultimately, it's your business. It's the way that everybody in your company should think and operate off of. And for me, it's, you know, I've always approached things from coming back a little bit to my background. For a period of time, I did a stint around doing 3D animation. And the biggest thing that I took away from that experience was whenever a client was like, hey, can you design this animation of a guy on a motorcycle and he does a bunch of flips and he does that? You're like, I guess, sure. And because every project started with this like empty infinite void in 3 dimensions, and you just start out the square and you just started cutting it until all of a sudden it was like, oh, I got a motorbike, right? And so really it was, the answer became, anything is possible. If you ask me for something, of course, we should be able to find a way to solve this. And so really that premise I've taken as it relates to product to be, it's you know, and you see it a lot of time if you're working with product or engineering, the question gets asked a lot of engineering, is this possible? And that's just not the right question.
The wrong question.
Yeah. The question is this the right solution? Is this the problem we should be fixing? Because if it's the right solution, it's the right problem, then you should just build it. You should spend the time that it takes to build it the right way. And that has been a fundamental way that we've, you know, approached products at Pocket.
Yeah, design is the what. We're going to open it up to some questions in a couple minutes, so I'll give you guys time to think about it. But you know, you're reminding me of one other designer we interviewed for the book, telling us about how they really wanted the password reset experience to be just phenomenal, like absolutely perfect. And then, of course, they did the math on like how often are people resetting their passwords, and like, okay, wait a minute, let's work on something else, right? So this question of the what. Or last week we put a convertible in space. That's pretty cool. We got a, you know, whatever, a Tesla flying around the world right now and on its way to Mars. But I think it is incumbent upon designers and entrepreneurs, because anything is possible, to your point. What is the thing that we should be building is now sort of that central question. Maybe shifting gears for a minute. So you were a founder, became a CEO when you sort of, you know, realized you could raise some capital and go from, I think your blog post, from me to we. Now that you've had some distance from this experience and you're part of something larger, what are some of the CEOs, and specifically even if there's someone past or present, who you really admire in terms of how they operate as a sort of design-led or creative-led CEO?
I mean, from a CEO, I feel like it's an overused answer, but I mean, the exact point you just said, like last week, like Elon Musk and SpaceX to me is one of the most inspiring in that like they approach this anything is like it is ridiculous sometimes when you think about what they're doing, and it's enormously inspiring to see. I mean, Douglas Adams would have been very proud with the convertible with "Don't Panic" floating, staring at Earth. Like it looks like it should belong in that book. Other CEOs, Katrina Lake from Stitch they were actually in our same office building. They started a floor below us, and in like 2 years, they were like above and below us, and like they were trying to like kick us out of our space. Like the amount of growth that she was able to drive in it, just the short amount of time was just awe-inspiring. But yeah, I'm curious, like you turn it around a little bit for you. Like you've worked probably with a lot more CEOs than I have. Like what have you seen work well? What hasn't?
Yeah, I think it's so for me. Some of those attributes, and I alluded to this before. This ability to have that sort of expansionist thinking, to sort of not just articulate the details of why your product is interesting or makes sense or solves some very specific problem, but actually paint the canvas for what is that larger vision. What are you trying to accomplish? What do you hope is going to happen, and what sort of new sort of state in the world are you trying to go after? And then I think between sort of first product and that vision really is this individual going to like just throw themselves into this opportunity, and they are just not going to rest until this vision that they have comes to pass. Like that is sort of the fundamental attributes of a great founding CEO. And I think the bias of history, many of you guys probably have observed this as well, are when you can get those founders who started oftentimes from very specific discipline, humble beginnings, when you can get them to scale into becoming CEOs and executives and surround them with lots of other talent, and then they can go to the next level and ultimately take these companies to large outcomes. I work with Lynn Jurich at Sunrun, and Lynn was a founder. She had never started a company before and is still running the company as a public company today with hundreds of thousands of customers. And so to sort of see that happen, I think is that balance of zooming in and being able to zoom out, and then just that kind of persistence and grit to kind of get there. But I will open it up to the room if you guys have questions and things you'd like to throw out to the group here, or to Nate and I as topics. But anything top of mind for folks here? I've got more questions. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, hey Nate, great product. I was kind of curious, as grassroots CEO, you brought your product from 160 lines to what it is today. Where do you see yourself as a CEO spending the time to better the company to keep that traction going? And where do you actually spend your time doing it?
Yeah, I'll say one of the biggest things I learned a little bit too late as CEO, and I think it was because I started from the indie developer where I tried to do everything. I did all of the jobs at Pocket, right? Was not hiring enough people too quickly. I think it was too hard for me to give up certain things. For example, we just hired a VP of product 3 weeks ago, and I'm like, in the first week, I was like, what the fuck was I doing the last 6 years? And I mean, you should be able to find amazing people who care about the same problem. And I think I should have spent more time recruiting and finding amazing people and less time answering support emails or nitpicking design elements. There's just certain things that was really hard for me to give up just because I also cared about them and I enjoyed that. But it wasn't necessarily the best thing for the company's time.
Yeah. Your question and Nate's response reminds me of a conversation I had with Evan Sharp, who's a co-founder of Pinterest. And when he began to hire people in the design discipline, which is where he came from, that were better than he was, he could start to feel much better about letting go of these things. But letting go and that sort of tractor beam of getting lost in the details is really, really hard to resist. So, other questions? Yeah.
So one thing that I faced as a CEO is where we're at right now is we have a lot of people that I highly respect who are coming in and providing a lot of valuable feedback and a lot of support. But sometimes I feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome because I respect them so much, I can't even believe they're talking to me, and then you're kind of lost in the fact, like, am I the right person to take this idea to the next stage? How do you kind of, I'm sure that you probably face similar situations, like how do you address that, and how do you yourself up when sometimes you're like, are they believing in me and maybe they shouldn't?
If anybody doesn't feel that, I would be astonished. And the reality is, like, nobody knows what they're doing. It's like, I'm pretty sure I remember there was a quote like Barack Obama was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he was the president. But I think the things that do drive me is when assuming you care about the problem you're working on and you've spent probably more time thinking about than anybody else, that's the thing you have to remember, which is, like, you are an expert in the thing that you're working on. You know more than the investors that you're trying to pitch. You know more than the other people kind of just starting to work on that industry. And I think that was always the thing I returned to, is just like, oh wait, no, I know a lot about content. There's not that many people that have worked for 7 years or 10 years on this. Like, I should be comfortable, expressing my viewpoint. And I think that at the core, you just got to remember, like, you actually know more than you think you do.
Amen. I know folks are going to start trickling out, so maybe one more question. Yeah, right here.
Hold on, Aaron. Let me give you this. Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. Awesome. So just to be really blunt, my question for you is, how many hours a day were you just spending just grinding and hustling and knocking things out to make sure that your business was going to thrive and succeed?
A lot. It's one of these things that, like, post-acquisition, I think you always think about. It's like, okay, I spent a good chunk of my late 20s, I've been working on this for 11 years now. And it was nights, weekends, till 10 p.m., till early in the morning.
But he does have a twin brother. Yeah. And so I would occasionally show up and be like, wait, which one of these guys is actually here?
Yeah.
So
we split the work that way. It was pretty good. So it's always hard for me to reflect upon and be like, okay, did we get where we are because of that? Or was that just like hustling too hard? And I don't actually know the answer. You definitely have to hustle. You definitely have to grind. But I would make sure that, one thing I wish I had done earlier was try to find time for yourself. Go work out. Go have that one hobby, because there was this hobby that required me to drive an hour and a half south and an hour and a half back, like, once a weekend. And it was terrifying for me for a while, because I was like, that's a lot of time to give up. But it actually gave me all of this time and space just to think and be by myself, and it actually ended up being a big impact on my ability to function.
awesome. Well, I thank you guys all for coming. Huge thanks to Nate, who built an incredible product and shared some of those stories. Happy to talk more later.
Thanks, everybody.